What's going on guys, Vanity here, back with another tutorial. This week's will be attempting to serve as the last tutorial you will ever need to watch on the creation and processing of 808 bass lines. So as I'm sure my subscribers know by now, all my tutorials are centered around hip hop production, and there is no doubt that the 808 is one of the most important elements in any hip hop record, especially in 2016. I always strive to produce content that doesn't just recycle others. So I've done my research online, and everything I've read and watched so far about low-end production seems to just repeat itself. You know, the same old make sure you've made space for the bass, put the bass in mono, etc. We know this, but how exactly do you produce a fat bottom end? Pun intended. In the next 10 minutes, that's exactly what I'm going to show you. So I've made a sample pack around this tutorial, which is going to include a bunch of 808s. The link to that will be in the description. I may also have a little card popping up somewhere on the screen around here, so watch out for that. This is one of the 808s that will be in it. And this is another one. I'll just turn off these plugins because they shouldn't be on. So a lot of these 808s have been sampled straight from an 808 machine by myself, and they're then being processed. So they started out sounding something like this. That's the sound that came straight off the 808 machine. I've then processed this 808 and turned it into this. So if you're looking for some really well sampled and well mixed 808s, definitely go and check that out. When it comes to creating any bass sound, you can't beat a pure sine wave on the bottom, but that doesn't always sound so interesting. That's when you can add upper harmonics through processing such as harmonic distortion to add some tone and interest to your 808s. So the first thing I want to get into is harmonic distortion. So what is harmonic distortion? The easiest way I can explain harmonic distortion is when an audio signal passes through an electronic device. Ideally, we would like the output signal to be identical to the input signal. However, this is not always the case, and of course I'm referring to when the device is neutralized. Every electronic processor that our signal runs through adds harmonics that were not present on the input signal. Now this is purely related to the nature of the components in the unit, but because these added harmonics are essentially a distortion of the input signal, we refer to this as harmonic distortion. Now harmonic distortion will add overtones to the fundamental frequency of a sound, and each harmonic distortion unit will do this in its own way. So when you hear people talking about analog warmth, this is exactly what they are referring to. However, even if you're not using analog equipment, you still need to understand harmonic distortion as it is present in digital plugins. So if I flick across to the right channel, you can see here that I'm using PSP's Vintage Warmer to add a touch of saturation to the 808 and also some of that analog warmth that has become almost like the holy grail in digital these days. Subharmonics. So there are effects such as subharmonic processors. Now there's a company called Refuse Software that make a plugin named Lowender that is for both Mac and Windows. I'll link it up in the description below. These are used for anything from thickening and adding weight to post sound effects such as explosions to solidifying the lower octave of a kick drum or bass sound. In short though, a subharmonic processor will generate and enhance subharmonic frequencies based on the harmonic content of the source audio signal. So the subharmonic frequencies generated of the input signal are below the fundamental frequency of the sound, and the fundamental frequency of a sound is of course the sine wave that determines the pitch of the sound. Here's a quick visual demonstration. So I've got an 808 here out of my sample pack, which again I will link up in the description. If I play this and pull up Voxengo's spam plugin, we can see that the fundamental frequency of this sound is roughly 53 Hz, which equates to G#1. Meaning this 808 is in the key of G sharp, and then the harmonics of a sound are then the whole number multiples of this fundamental frequency, which again was 53 Hz. This leads on to my next point, making sure your 808s are in key with your track, and the same goes for the kick drum. Everything needs to be in key with each other. This may sound obvious, and it really is, yet I hear so many records in where the 808, kick, and the rest of the track are all sitting in different keys. Any experienced producer will know this just by listening to sounds, whether or not something is in key or not. A less experienced producer may have to check using some kind of key detection software. Alright, so finally I want to get onto my trick for processing 808 bass sounds. When it comes to 808 processing, I have my own way, or at least a technique that I've used. I came across it a long time ago, however after doing some research for this tutorial, I can now see that it's been attributed to Dave Pensalo. I'll briefly sum up what I've got going on and then I'll take you through the process behind it. So first I'm going to play you the 808. Now this is an 808 that came straight out of an 808 machine that I sampled myself. So that's the raw sample straight out of the 808 unit. Now I've processed it using this bass technique that I'm going to take you through in a second, and this is what it sounds like now. Alright, so I'm splitting the 808 onto two channels. You can see here, one dry, one wet. The first dry channel is set at unity gain, and the second is then adjusted to suit. On the second channel, or the wet channel, I'll take you through the plugins that I've got. I've got a Valley People Dynamite, taking off around 6 dB of reduction. The detector is set to peak with a 0.8 second release time. Following that, I've got a TubeTech PE1 Pultec equalizer, boosting 10 dB at 60 Hz, alternating by 10 or so. The reason I'm combining the boost and the alternation on this Pultec EQ is because it creates a unique EQ curve which boosts around the center frequency but not the center frequency itself. Now if you Google Pultec EQ trick, I'm sure there'll be more in-depth videos on this subject. Alright, so I want to talk you through the kind of theory behind this process. So I'm splitting the channels and then I'm mixing them back together. So essentially mixing the dry unaffected 808 with the wet affected 808. This allows me to keep the punchy transient from the dry 808 while also keeping the loud, kind of sustained sound that the Dynamite is giving me. It's essentially parallel compression, but in this instance I'm using the dry signal to keep the initial transient in place as the wet version is squashing it ever so slightly. Then I'm mixing it back in with the wet compressed signal which has pulled up the rest of the 808. This is kind of the premises for parallel compression. However, it is more common for the wet compressed signal to be heavily compressed in order to bring out some more of the detail in the audio signal. So there's a couple more little secret plugins I want to mention as well. One of them is Max Bass from Waves. I'll just go ahead and pull that up. So Max Bass looks like this. It uses a proprietary signal processing in order to synthesize a new bass sound that you can use to almost sit on top of your pre-existing bass. So it can be heard on earphones or laptop speakers, so essentially speakers that don't have the capabilities to reproduce really low end. You could almost call it the little speaker bass plugin. So the next one is R-Bass by Waves. Now, it is a similar plugin, however, rather than generating a synthesized bass sound, it will add harmonic overtones further up the frequency spectrum than the audio source signal. So like we mentioned earlier about the fundamental frequency, and then the overtones are essentially whole number multiples of that fundamental frequency. So this R-Bass will add or fill in some of those whole number multiples, so again you can hear it on little speakers. You have three main controls, a frequency slider up top. This is where you choose the fundamental frequency of the source sound, so grab your spam plugin like I had up earlier, Spam Plus, find the fundamental. You can then input it on here so it knows where to add the whole number multiples. You then got an intensity control, which essentially controls the amounts that you're adding, and you then got a gain slider, which kind of speaks for itself. A couple of extra points. You can also apply some mid-side processing to pull the bass out of the sides and really focus it in the middle of your mix. Now, mid-side processing is a whole other topic, so I won't get into that in this video, but it's definitely something you should have a play with. Always check the phase when mixing any two bass sounds together. Now, most plugins do have a way of flipping the phase or inverting the phase so that they won't cancel each other out. You've also got another thing called frequency perception. So when setting a bass signal at equal amplitude with a mid-range signal, you will perceive the bass signal as being quieter. Look up the Fletcher-Munson curves for more information on that. Alright, so I hope this tutorial has taught you something and given you some ideas and techniques to go away with and hopefully apply in your own productions. Any questions, drop me a comment below. I'll make time to reply to each and every one, or you can always hit me on Twitter, email, or any of my social accounts, all the links to which will be in the description. Remember to check out the sample pack that I promise will provide you with some of the best 808 sounds you own. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, peace.